Good evening and welcome to this Wednesday night's book study as part of our outreach here at New Covenant House. We are reading Alexander Christianopoulos' book called Christian Anarchism, which grew out of his doctoral thesis. And we are working on chapter 1, which is about the Sermon of the Mount. And within the Sermon of the Mount is the command not to resist evil. And Christianopoulos has gone through 5 points, 4 points so far, and we're going to be talking about the 5th point about not to resist evil tonight. It's a couple of pages and it's pretty packed with very important information that is really relevant to everybody. I cannot possibly paraphrase and do justice to the text, so I think I'm going to just read quite a bit of it. You are most likely, if you're listening to this, you're probably doing it at a different time than the time that we're recording it, although you could. If you're here on Wednesday nights at 7, which I definitely encourage you to do in the future, I will, in a little while, post the session here in the New Covenant House Facebook group, and also share it out to Christian anarchists. So let's dig into it, and the title of this section is called Overcoming of the Cycle of Violence. There are several points in this section. As you know, Alexander Christianopoulos' goal here is to kind of place the writings of several authors who is dealing with Christian anarchism in one place. To find them all. One of the writers is called, his name is Baloo, and he says, evil can be overcome only with good. Evil can be overcome only with good. It's not easy, and at first it can appear counterintuitive. And Ellul, he's a French fella, also writing, stresses that non-resistance implies seeking another kind of victory, renouncing the marks of victory. So, in other words, we know what victory should look like, but we should be prepared to renounce that and really accept a different result from what the world would dictate that we should be looking for. And he was going to elaborate on that in a later chapter in the book. The only possible way of breaking the chain of violence, of rupturing the circle of fear and hate, this is the real alternative to violence for humankind, he says. And then he goes on, at the same time, no Christian anarchist pretends it is painless. Overcoming evil with love requires a willingness to endure violence or evil without doing violence or evil in return, even in fact, especially when treated unjustly. So, overcoming evil with good is not an easy thing, and it requires suffering and sacrifice. And that comes on several times in this chapter about either suffering or sacrifice. And it kind of concludes also that that's exactly what Jesus did when he died on the cross. He met evil with good. And he was willing to pay the consequences. And that's what he wants us to do as well. And then he goes on, it requires forgiveness. So in other words, when you are treated unjustly, you need to be able to forgive the person who treated you that way. And this is Dave Andrews. We met him in our previous book study, who says, by definition, it means making the sacrifice that is necessary to accept an injustice without demanding satisfaction in return. That sacrifice is precisely the relinquishing of a person's right to restitution or retaliation in order to restore a relationship. And that last part here about to restore the relationship is important, because when you meet evil with evil, the best you can hope for is to have peace. But the real goal should be to restore the relationship. In other words, going not just one, but all the way further than that. So the goal, in other words, in not to resist evil, is to restore the relationship. So Andrews goes on here. It may not transform every bad relationship into a good friendship, but it is the only thing that ever has or ever will. So it may not always be possible to restore the relationship, but it's the only, resisting evil is the only one that has ever done that. Meeting evil with evil would never in a million years be able to do that. You would always have, you might have peace, but you will continue to be enemies. Only such an attitude of love, nonviolence, and forgiveness makes healing possible. It forces the oppressor to see you in a new light and to reconsider the situation. Both sides must win. Non-resistance and its concomitant willingness to suffer unjustly clears the ground for reconciliation, because it exposes the destructive violence of the situation and makes a moving plea to overcoming. So there it was again, the willingness to suffer unjustly, that's what clears the way for reconciliation. So in other words, if you insist on old-fashioned justice, then you will never achieve reconciliation. And then the book goes into another point here that about the natural tendency to for self-preservation. The way the world uses evil to retaliate for evil is a reaction to a natural reaction for self-preservation. But Ballou will argue that it is the opposite. It's a little hard to grasp the idea, but he says non-resistance is the true method of self-preservation. He recalls that resistance always tend to be justified by self-defense. So then he goes into a text here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says, let me just see. It promises personal security, but exposes its subjects not only to aggravated assaults, but to every species of danger. We've met that before, that when you use violence or meet when you dole out aggression, then the best thing you can hope for to get in return is more aggression. So it shakes the fist, brandishes the sword, and holds up the rod in terror to keep the peace, but constantly excites, provokes, and perpetuates war. It has been a liar from the beginning. It has been a Satan professing to cast out Satan, yet confirming the power and multiplying the number of demons which possesses our unfortunate race. It does not conduce self-preservation, but to self-destruction, and ought therefore to be discarded. So in other words, his idea is that this violence that begets violence will only lead to self-destruction and never to self-preservation. So he says, the usual method of self-preservation constantly runs into very wrongs it aims to prevent. So yeah, again here, evil begets evil. So then it goes on in the middle of the next paragraph. In my book is page 42, which is the abridged version. You may have a different version, you may even have downloaded it from the internet. But it says, the cycle of violence cannot be broken by cathartic or exemplary acts of violence. It can only be overcome by love and non-resistance. We talked about that last time, that no matter how noble your acts of violence is, they will never succeed, because the only result that you get is not more violence. But of course, such non-resistance is not easy. In the words of an Indian poet, true love is not for the faint of heart. Non-resistance requires an absolute commitment, and this means a willingness to suffer, and there it is again, even to die, just like Jesus did on the cross, rather than to resist. Thus, non-resistance is not cowardly, it requires courage. Gandhi observed that bravery consists in dying, not in killing. This readiness to pay the ultimate price is discussed in more detail in chapter 2 and 5 of this book. So in other words, there it is again, the willingness to suffer is required for answering evil with good. It is not easy. So when Jesus asked his disciple not to desist evil, he meant it. Moreover, as chapter 2 illustrates, Jesus practiced what he preached both throughout his life and in his very death. And that's what I just said, that he practiced what he preached. He himself died as a result of it. So in the last paragraph tonight says, so to repeat and sum up, Jesus says, according to Tolstoy, I remember that Tolstoy is the one who really, really thinks that this section, the resist not evil part, is central in Christianity. Some of the other writers may not think that is the most important thing, but he does. The teaching of the world is that men should do evil to one another, but my teaching is that they should love one another. Jesus rejects the violence of the world by preaching non-resistance. His teaching overcomes the cycle of violence by refusing to resist. A faithful follower of Jesus, a Christian, therefore cannot resist, cannot participate in violence, and only by thus following Jesus' instruction might help overcome the world's vicious cycle of violence. So Tolstoy is advocating this radical non-violence attitude. Some of the other writers are not quite that single-minded. There are nuances, and that's where some of the disputes between anarchists come in. Some are pacifists, some are non-violent, and some are non-resistant. So some will say that civil disobedience is okay, and others will say that it is not, because it is an act of resistance that may result in retaliation from the law enforcement side. Okay? So that was the end of the Resist Not Evil section. There's just one more thing to do, and that is to talk about what this means for anarchists. And we will do that next week. Yep. So, in other words, I will post this recording in the group shortly, and you can put in your comments there if you have any. I absolutely encourage you to do that. So I thank you for coming, and I'll see you next week, hopefully.